Take it away. We're ready.
Commissioner O'Donnell, can you hear us?
Jesse, in and out. Okay. Yeah.
Commissioner Smith, can you confirm that you can hear us? Thank you.
Yes, I can. I'm here and I can hear you.
Today is Wednesday, August 18, 2021.
No, but we've had some discussions. I remember.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Well, me and you
Here.
and him.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
And I don't think
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
my memory is
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
but
And Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
it could be that I just
All right. So the first thing
well
is
funded my fellow Yep.
To the flag of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. It's good to see a bunch of people out in the audience. I know you may have some not so nice things to say, but I'll just say right now, I'm happy to see you. I think we're all happy to see you. So commissioners on the Zoom, you can see we have a room full of people here. So just wanted to say welcome, and it's good to see you all. All right, we do not have any ceremonies and proclamations, but we do have some citizen comment. I have a few folks that are ready to speak. Are we using both microphones? We want to line up both, Jacob?
Or we have them come up and sit at the testimonial area and they can speak there.
Right, we're using both?
Yes.
Either one?
Either one.
All right, first up is Doug Neely, and then we'll have Bob Mahoney. If you can come up and... Please state your name and city of residence for the record.
Doug Neely, Oregon City. I'm here to speak about the citizens' comment at the last meeting of Tom Guile, referred to the Planning Commission as chicanery on their part, Planning Department, as chicanery on their part. The Planning Department being in the back pocket of icon development. From my standpoint, the fact that the planning department had notified those people who had indicated they were going to put forward applications, that they were identified, is transparency. I see it no other way. And when Commissioner O'Donnell gave his opinion as a citizen, I think he reflected the position of most of you commission members. I went and looked at I think it was the July 21st meeting regarding this, and everybody seemed surprised. I would have thought, personally, that I would have been surprised if that wasn't the case. If individuals, in this case developers, that were being impacted by a subsequent code revision, would not be informed about the issues that would be changed and so forth. And I think that I find no fault at all personally in what the Planning Commission did, Planning Department did, excuse me. I think it was pure transparency, and I'll yield my time here to my neighbor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Neely. All right, and I think we now have the timer ready to go. All right, Bob Mahoney.
Madam Mayor, if I speak over 3 minutes, will you remind me?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, is this clock working? Okay, but yes, I will step in.
I'm pulling your leg a little bit there, man. Okay, just to get started, I'm going to speak real slow, and I'm going to use little words, just in case the Army and the Navy is listening, so they can keep up, okay? I'm going to
Careful.
use some buzzwords for you. Public hearing, appeals, conditional uses, variances, lot area averaging. That's a roll-aid word for you right there. Site plan reviews, urban rural boundaries, metro land use policies, subdivisions, traffic circulation, water runoff, water control, water availability, intersection capacity, lot area design, fire control. Now, these are all icons of planning. Did I just mention icon? Shame on me. Property rights, neighborhood association review and comments, water and sewer supply, that's just Monday. You ought to see the rest of the week. And this is what our planning director and her staff do on a daily basis with transparency. And they represent this city with the distinguished professional ethics. And they all do this within the code of this city. Next time any one of you people decide to come down off that rostrum which you were appointed and elected to occupy, and come down here and speak as a citizen, you might want to consider making it permanent. We elected you to sit up there and make decisions according to the codes and the standards of the state of Oregon. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you very kindly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mahoney. Next up, we have Mindy Redburn. And then after that, we'll have Kimberly Walsh, if you want to, both of you each can come up and pick a table. One at each, yeah. So, Mindy Redburn.
Hi, my name is Mindy Redburn, resident of Oregon City. Thank you, Commissioners and Mayor Lyle Smith, for taking this time for citizen comments. I read two things recently I want to share. Recently in the Trail News, Mayor Lyle Smith noted the City Commission's first goal is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community and organizations. In a Facebook group, someone recently posted the following in response to an article about the Newburgh School District banning any symbols, including flags, related to Black Lives Matter or Pride. Quote, very good in my opinion, the only flag that should be present in schools is the American flag. Oregon City School Board, take note, unquote. This post was supporting and calling for Oregon City schools to also ban any symbols related to Black Lives Matter or Pride. This seems to me the opposite of inclusive and safe. This seems to be very specifically promote exclusion of two groups. So I was surprised to see that Mayor Lyle Smith liked this post. This is problematic, and particularly for the LGBT community. A few stats to be aware of. LGBTQ youth are 40% more likely to commit suicide if they don't have a supportive adult. Each episode of LGBT victimization, such as physical or verbal harassment, increases the likelihood of self-harming. Compared to LGBTQ students with no or few supportive staff at school, Compared to many supportive staff at school, they are less likely to feel unsafe because of their sexual orientation or gender expression, less likely to miss school because of the feeling unsafe or uncomfortable, and have higher GPAs. When my daughter went to John McLaughlin, they had pride hearts by the classroom doors to identify safe teachers and safe locations for LGBTQ families. Students need to be able to identify accepting students and places. They may not feel safe at home, they may not feel safe at school, they may be bullied, and they need to know where they can go. They should not have to guess and be wrong. I was surprised to see our mayor supporting this post that seems against the idea of symbols of inclusion. I think it's only fair, though, that the mayor gets a chance to explain her reason for liking this post. I also think our families in our community should know where the mayor stands. As a city leader, your example and opinions matter. Even if you can't directly influence the school district, your leadership sets a tone. As a parent in the school district, I would like to ask you to please consider sharing your thoughts on if the OC schools should really do the same as Newburgh schools and why. Thank you very much.
Ms. Kimberly Walsh.
My name is Kimberly Walsh, and I live in Oregon City. I'm here today to give you an introduction and an update on the group Unite Oregon City. Unite Oregon City formed in 2016 in response to real and local events that were affecting the children of Oregon City, our children. A group of parents got together after several racist events occurred at Oregon City High School. We wanted Black children to feel safe at school and in the community and not be called racial slurs. Since that time, the group has grown and our focus has expanded. Our agenda is straightforward. We want to make our community more welcoming and safe for marginalized groups. We want LGBTQ youth to feel comfortable being who they are and not to be bullied. We want the houseless to have resources. We want the police to treat people equally. We acknowledge that people have been treated differently based on the color of their skin, ethnicity, disabilities, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and socioeconomic status. And we want that to change. Inclusion in this context is defined as, quote, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, end quote. It does not mean giving everyone an equal voice. It does not mean listening to groups which promote hate, bias, racism, classism, or homophobic ideology. We are an action-oriented group. We have partnered with the school district to implement an anti-bullying program. We make sandwiches once a month for those in need. We have met with the police chief to discuss systemic racism and use of force policies. We have hosted 2 Juneteenth events celebrating the newly created national holiday. In order to continue to create equity and equality, we want to continue partnering with the Oregon City School District to make sure all students are treated with respect and that the curriculum reflects a diverse student body. We do not want to defund the police. We want to continue to support Chief Ban in his quest to provide great customer service for all of our community members. And we want to provide support and insight to help all of you, the mayor and city commissioners, meet your #1 goal for the city as stated in the Trail News. Quote, promote diversity, equality, and inclusion for a safe, inclusive community and organization. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you. I will make one short comment and then I'll move on since I was asked to address the comment on Facebook. I will tell you it is my personal opinion and I do believe that city facilities and school grounds should fly the American flag. That's the flag I support. I believe that's the only flag or the state of Oregon flag that should be approved. It is my personal opinion. So I think I've addressed your comment. All right, so the next item on the agenda, that's it for our public comment, is presentations. We don't have any. We have the adoption of the agenda. Would anybody like to pull anything off the consent agenda?
No. I've reviewed everything and I find everything satisfactory, but I can't speak for my fellow commissioners.
Commissioner Smith? I've already seen Commissioner O'Donnell. No, okay.
I don't have anything.
No.
No. All right, is there a motion to approve?
Yes, I'd like to move the approval of the consent agenda, items 7A through 7E.
Second.
And thank you, Katie, for the very accurate minutes, particularly of the work session.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
and Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye. All right, so the next item up for the agenda, which is the primary item we have tonight, is our public hearing. So we will get this started. I had a long meeting today with staff, just trying to navigate all of the potential votes and motions and pathways that this could go down. So it is one of our more complicated items, and depending on how we vote on issues will depend on what happens tonight in the meeting and for all the folks that are here present. So I want to take our time as we go through this public hearing to make sure we don't misstep. It is important. So I'm going to start off by opening the public hearing. This is the public hearing for file GLUA-21-000-019/CU 21-00002, Father's Heart Street Ministry Conditional Use Permit for a warming shelter. Mr. Kabizman.
So, thank you, Mayor. Before the staff report, the commission should consider procedural issues that's been raised. Under the city's code, this hearing is held on the record. That means no new evidence, no new issues. However, we've had a request from the applicant to reopen the record to clarify an issue, and we've also received several additional comments. So the question that the commission has before it is whether you want to allow new evidence, and if you do, how do you want to do it? So the first question, do you want to allow new evidence into the record? The code anticipates that a review will be held on the record and no new evidence come in, and there'd be no issues if you proceed without reopening the record, and we can move right into the staff report. However, there's also an interest in getting the most accurate information that the city can, which might, counsel reopening the record to make sure that we get accurate information. And if the commission wants to reopen the record to deal with the issue, there are two options. First, the commission could remand it back to the planning commission and allow them to take any new evidence. That's a role laid out for the planning commission in the code, so it makes some sense. And there's time for that. The 120-day period runs out October 21st. So you could remand it back to the planning commission could hold a hearing, and then come back to you in late September, possibly early October. Alternatively, the commission could hold the hearing tonight, allow in the new evidence, and if you choose to do that, you would have to have a process that would allow people to respond to that new evidence. It's not contemplated by our code, but LUBA's rules on review of land use says that this type of action would be a procedural error if you don't follow your code, and it's only a remand if somebody's interests are substantially prejudiced. And so long as anybody has an opportunity to respond to the new evidence, there's no substantial prejudice. So even though it's not contemplated by our code, it is an option that the council could follow. So that's basically, the two questions. Do you want to allow in new evidence? If you do, how would you like to do that? So, the first question for you, do you want to allow in new evidence? If you want to say no, we're going to go with what we have, then we'd proceed to the staff report. Say yes, we can follow up with the next question.
Are there any questions for Mr. Kabizman? All right, then the decision that we need to make, and I need a motion and a vote, is whether or not we want to open. The record is currently closed, so I think we would only need a motion just to open the record if we wanted to open it. But maybe a vote to be clear on either direction of whatever the motion's going to be.
There may be some questions and there may be discussion before we take a motion. So I want to ask staff, if I may, was everyone aware that the hearing would be on the record?
Yes, we did make it clear that the hearing would be on the record.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion? would you like me to expand on the key item of why this is coming up, or do you guys feel comfortable and you want to make a motion?
I think it was pretty clear. I think it was very clear in the memo from the staff. I do not want to open the record. It is on the record, and I'm not sure that the evidence that might be presented is substantive enough to open the record and to allow for everything to be heard all over again. So that's just my opinion.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'll join in that opinion simply because I did watch the Planning Commission hearing. I thought it was thorough. I thought it was in depth. I thought both the clients had an opportunity to present their input. The neighborhood have had a thorough opportunity to present their input. The folks that run Father's Heart had a very good opportunity to present their input. I don't know what else would add to that. I thought the hearing was very thorough in nature. I don't see what other additions would be presented tonight. So I would not reopen the meeting, and I would not remand it back to Planning Commission. I would deal with it tonight as a city commission. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Smith.
I thought that one of the main issues that were being asked this question was because of the amount of days that is in the record for the warming shelter to be open or historically been open. I don't think that was covered at all. So I think that's the reason we're asking this question. I feel that's a pretty good, I feel that's a pretty important information to know in the record on historically how many nights that they have been open in the past for the warming shelter.
Mr. Ray, do you want to clarify, or do you like me to?
I'm happy to clarify if you'd like.
Can you clarify, please?
All right. So the initial application identifies the number of nights that was included, and that was 43. And so our planning's original staff report included analysis of being open 43 nights during one winter period. Then at the first Planning Commission hearing, we had testimony from the applicant indicating that the number was wrong and that it was somewhere closer to 11. And so the revised staff report and discussion and decision in which Planning Commission made their decision was based on somewhere closer to 11. The request is based off the number of nights that it gets below 33 degrees, including wind chill. And so the number of days is not really known in the future anyway. It's a question of the commission is how relevant is that to the approval criteria and the impacts of the facility.
Right. So we could have an extra cold winter, for example, and it could be,
Significantly more.
it could be 30 nights below 33. I think we would all be shivering, and a lot of people would be unhappy because that's not our usual winter, but it could be that, or it could be 10.
Right.
The average is 10 or 11, so.
I just wanted to make sure that the commission knew that there was some question. So we would recommend, because there's conflicting evidence in the record, assume it's the higher of the two numbers to the extent that that impacts the facility. You can decide.
Generally, I guess the issue is if we were to grant the conditional use permit or whatever, it would apply for as many nights as it was below 33 degrees. So that's why you may or may not consider it a piece of information that's worth opening the record for. And so, all right. So that's the discussion. Do we have a motion? I still haven't heard a motion.
I would like to move that we not reopen the record.
I will second that motion.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
No.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
and Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Motion passes, and for that reason, we do not need to have the discussion about whether or not we're remaining it to the planning commission. That means it's going to stay here with us for tonight.
And to be clear, by that motion, I also understand that the commission has rejected any additional written comments that have come in with new evidence in them.
Correct.
Have you made a determination whether it's new evidence?
So at least there are several additional written comments. At least one of them is specifically directed at this question. There's also additional comments, some of which contain additional new evidence. Not necessarily directed at at the question of the number of nights, but other questions.
That were not already in the record?
That were not already in the record, correct.
Can we just make a decision on this? Why are we?
Just to clarify, he said additional comments came in. I wanted to know whether they were comments that were already in the, topics were already in the record. If they were already in the record, then there's no reason why we can't see them. It's not new evidence.
Right.
But the way you're stating it is that the information has some new information in it that was not in the record.
Yes, there's new evidence.
That would apply across the board then.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so with that, we will move on in the proceedings this evening. The next up, we're going to have our presentation from staff. Ms. Truey?
All right, I'd like to present Diliana Vasileva, Assistant Planner of the City, provide the staff report, and then after the staff report, we'll maybe come back to those emails and enter them to the record to the extent that they can.
Laura, you're very hard to understand at that last comment. I heard you say the part about introducing Diliana, and then after that it was not.
Sorry, is this better?
Much.
Thank you, sorry, my apologies. So Diliana will provide the staff report for you. Then after the staff report, we'll come back to those comments. Some of them will be entered into the record because they have participated before the Planning Commission and do not include new evidence. Others will not. So we'll come back to that theme of evidence in just a moment after Ms. Vasileva is completed.
Are those going to be made available?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Diliana Vasileva. I'm the Assistant Planner for the City, and I'll be presenting the staff report for the Father's Heart Conditional Use Permit.
Can you pause 1 second? I want to make sure Commissioner Smith and Commissioner O'Donnell, can you hear Diliana? I don't know that I can say your last name. I'll probably get it wrong, so I'm sorry. I saw I kind of.
I could barely hear. It wasn't particularly clear.
Can you try again?
Is this better?
Announce your slide and presentation.
All right. So again, I'm Diliana Vasileva. I'm the Assistant Planner for the City, and I'll be presenting the staff report for the conditional use permit for the Father's Heart nighttime warming shelter.
Sorry, can you pause, please? I need to be able to see the commissioners on the screen in case they have a question. I'm sorry, this is the hybrid Zoom in-person world we're in. I just want to make sure I can keep up and respect our commissioners. So let me know if you can't hear her. She has spoken, she's taken off her mask so we can hear you very clearly. So thank you. Okay, start again for the third time. It'll work this time.
Thank you. Again, Diliana Vasileva, Assistant Planner for the City, and I will be presenting the staff report for the Father's Heart Conditional Use Permit. My comparison. There we go. Yes. The subject site is located at the corner of 12th Street and Washington Street. It's approximately half an acre in size, and it's developed with the existing building and parking lot. It is zoned mixed-use corridor, and surrounding properties include residential zoning, including the R3.5 district, as well as the R6 district, as well as institutional and mixed-use downtown zoning. The property is developed with the Father's Heart Street Ministry Shelter. It is a day shelter serving low and no income populations. For the past 4 years, each year, they have also received approval through an emergency resolution from the City Commission, which has allowed them to operate as an emergency nighttime warming shelter on nights that the temperature is forecasted to reach or to fall below 33 degrees. With this application, the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit, which would allow them to operate as a nighttime warming shelter without having to ask the City Commission for an emergency resolution to be able to do that each year. The definition of a temporary warming shelter is in our code, and it's a shelter that operates between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. when the outside temperature is predicted to be 33 degrees or below, including wind chill factor as measured by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So with the requested application, there are a few things that are outside of the scope of our review. Number one is the existing day use shelter, which is a legal non-conforming use that is existing and allowed to continue. This review is only for the temporary nighttime warming shelter, so the day shelter use is not part of our review. Number two is that there are no alterations proposed to the building or site, so building design standards and dimensional standards are also not part of this review. And number three is historic design guidelines. Even though this property is within a historic district, historic design guidelines don't apply since no new construction is being proposed, and historic review applies only to building design and not land uses. So as with any other land use application, your decision is based on applicable criteria within our code. My presentation doesn't include all of the applicable conditional use permit criteria that are in the staff report, but I wanted to touch on some of the more pertinent criteria that we have received a lot of public comments on. So starting with the conditional use permit criteria specific to shelters, our code requires that conditional use permit applications for shelters submit and maintain a written community engagement plan, which includes information on the scope of services, population that is being served, bed capacity for nightly guests, hours of operation, 24-hour contact information, and an explanation of how the shelter will address concerns or complaints. Our code also requires that shelters hold a community meeting prior to commencing operation, and a minimum of one time a year thereafter, to discuss the community engagement plan and provide an opportunity for more communication between the shelter and the community. So we have a condition, the applicant has submitted a draft community engagement plan, and we have a condition of approval to finalize that plan at the community meeting that they're required to hold, and to submit the final version to the city, as well as to post it on their website so it's available for review by the neighbors and by the public. The Planning Commission also revised a condition in order to require an additional community meeting beyond the one that's required by our code, to allow for the Father's Heart to touch base with the community prior to the beginning of the winter season and following the completion of the winter season to reflect on the prior season. Moving on to the general conditional use permit criteria that is applicable for any conditional use permit, not just shelters. Our code requires that the characteristics of the site are suitable for the proposed use. Staff finds that the standard is met, given that the subject site already includes a shelter that is a known resource and is accessible by their clients. Additionally, the property is in very close proximity to the Oregon City Transit Center, as well as several transit streets, and the site is also within walking distance to several churches and other public amenities such as parks and the library. Our Our code also requires that the proposed use does not alter the character of the surrounding area in a manner which impedes the use of properties for their primary use, which is residential in this case. Since the nighttime warming shelter has been operating for the past 4 years, the neighborhood character and neighborhood conditions will remain similar as to what they have been the past 4 years. We've heard a lot of concerns from neighbors about trespassing, theft, drug use, or other illegal activities that may have an impact on neighborhood character. The purpose of the nighttime warming shelter is to bring people indoors, so these concerns are not necessarily associated with the nighttime shelter, which would help alleviate some of the concerns we've heard from neighbors by providing a place for people to go inside rather than potentially engaging in any nuisance or illegal activity. And lastly, the area and the neighborhood is served by the Oregon City Police Department, so any illegal activities are regulated by police rather than through this land use process. The next conditional use permit criteria is about compliance with goals and policies in the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. There are several goals and policies that are applicable to this proposal, including affordable housing, transportation, efficient use of land, but the one that I wanted to focus a little bit more on is livability. We've heard from a lot of neighbors about potential impacts to neighborhood livability, and neighborhood livability within the comprehensive plan goals and policies applies not only to property owners and taxpayers in Oregon City, but to all community members, including clients of the Father's Heart. And this proposal would help advance some of those goals related to neighborhood livability by providing a warm place to sleep on freezing nights for our community members that need that. But through the required community engagement plan, it also ensures that livability for neighborhood residents is maintained by providing a mechanism for through which the neighbors' concerns can be heard and addressed, and it's revisited periodically with the annual meeting to ensure that livability is maintained. The last conditional use permit criteria allows for the Planning Commission or City Commission to stipulate restrictions or conditions which uphold the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance and mitigate adverse effects of the proposal. We have a condition to maintain a log of nights of operation each year, which would get submitted to the city and shared at the required community meetings. And we also have a condition of approval to post the Good Neighbor Agreement and the Community Engagement Plan on the Father's Heart website, since we've heard a lot of concerns that these documents aren't publicly available. And again, the Planning Commission added an additional condition to require a second annual neighborhood meeting. So the Planning Commission voted 4-1 to recommend approval of this conditional use permit at the August 9th Planning Commission meeting. Again, Laura talked about some of the conflicting information within the application. The original application identified that the shelter, nighttime warming shelter, operates 43 nights a year. That information was presented at the first Planning Commission meeting in July, and the applicant clarified that that was the number over the past 4 years, which equals approximately 11 nights a year. As has been said, that could change year to year, and we recommend looking at the higher number to when you're considering impacts. So with the record closed, we are recommending that the City Commission accept the Planning Commission's recommendation of approval of this application. We did get some additional comments following the close of the record. We've already discussed the additional information submitted by the applicant. We also received a comment from Sharon Harvey, which identified concerns about neighborhood impacts and the Father's Heart clientele in the neighborhood outside of the shelter operating hours. This person did previously submit comments, and the information that they provided in their new comment is not new information, so we could accept this into the record. Same with the third comment from Greg Lefevre. He previously submitted comments into the record and is not identifying new information with their updated comment. And the last comment from Karen Lynch was that person did not previously submit comments, and that comment was submitted following the close of the record. So with the record closed, we could not admit that comment.
Sorry. So we can't do testimony, but we clarified new people can speak, so we can accept testimony from Karen Lynch as well. It's been emailed to the commission. We can't accept new testimony, we can't accept new facts or evidence into the record, but we can accept new people speaking. And so the testimony that's identified on the screen from the three people will all be accepted into the record. The only one that is being rejected is the written testimony from the applicant itself.
And I'm happy to answer any questions, but before I do, I wanted to hand it back over to the city attorney to talk about some federal regulations that are at play with this application.
Yes, Commissioners, the final point tonight is that this application implicates the Fair Housing Act, the FHA, and the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. These federal laws can supersede local laws like our code to some extent. They prohibit the city from considering the personal circumstances of the patrons of a particular use in making their decisions. The review is a use subject to the criteria of the code that Ms. Vasileva just went through. It's limited to the night use. The day use is already decided. But in reviewing it, you can't look at the personal, there's a variety of court cases and those federal acts tell the city that it cannot consider the personal circumstances of the patrons, whether they be disabled in whatever way. These are complex issues, and they've resulted in significant litigation for other jurisdictions when they've dealt with these types of questions. So the commission should tread carefully when considering things involving the nature of the patrons of the use. Oh, and one final thing, just to make sure we get this done, there is the ORS 197763 discussion about a hearing. So there was a staff report prepared for tonight's meeting. It lists the substantive criteria that are at issue, and Ms. Vasileva just went through them. All arguments should be directed at those criteria or other criteria that you believe apply to this. You'll notice I didn't say new evidence because there is no new evidence, as the commission has indicated. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements sufficient to afford the city commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue or preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And finally, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the city to respond will preclude an action for damages. And then we also need to run through the ex parte contacts, bias and conflict of interest things if any of the commissioners want to declare.
Ask you about ex parte. I know, yeah. Can't hear them.
And that's the end of what I have to add.
Turn your head so you're speaking directly into the mic.
I apologize. So we'll get this right sooner or later.
Okay, you want to ask each one individually, or you're asking us just as a group?
I think as a group, if any commissioner wants to declare any bias, ex parte contacts or conflict of interest, now would be the time. And if so, we can then see if any member of the public wishes to challenge any commissioner.
I'll go to the folks. I'll go to Commissioner Smith and Commissioner O'Donnell. Do you have anything to declare at this time?
Don't have any conflicts or bias. I will just mention that I do live about 5 blocks away from the site.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I have no conflicts, no bias. I do not live in that immediate area. I did watch the Planning Commission, which is a suitable topic to watch. And that's about it.
Tomorrow?
No conflicts, no biases. Like Commissioner O'Donnell, I did watch the Planning Commission meeting as well.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, I'm going to say for the record that I have been a resident of the McLaughlin neighborhood since 1989. I live in proximity to the site. I am aware of the activities of the site. I drive by it on a regular basis. I have many friends in the neighborhood, including those that live adjacent to the site, and those who live in the McLaughlin neighborhood, as well as other places in the city. So that is my ex parte contact.
All right, and I do not have any biases or conflict of interest to share. I do not live in the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
Does anybody in the audience have any challenges to any particular commissioners or to the jurisdiction of the commission to hear this matter? Seeing none.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move forward with our testimony. And first we have the applicant, and the applicant is allowed 15 minutes. We have the applicant. I have Marty Gant.
And just to clarify for the record, since there is no testimony, we're going to wait till after the testimony's up, and the applicant will have a chance to have a rebuttal, and that rebuttal, they can bring up things that they think is outside the record. After that, if we catch anything that we identify as new evidence, we'll tell you later, so we're not going to cut people off while they're talking, just to set the expectation.
Okay. Mr. Wiley, do you have this timer that's going to work?
Mayor Lyle-Smith, I have a
I know mine.
question.
Hang on, I'm
Yes.
talking to Mr. Wiley.
The one on front of you should match the one that's out here.
And so you'll give him 15 minutes?
We're doing the regular testimony, and that would require 15 minutes.
Yes. Okay, well, so while he's setting that, Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, I have a question about what you just said. So you just said what I think, I'm going to repeat what I think I heard you say. You said that rather than interrupting anybody if they give new evidence, you'll tell us later. So how does that help us if they bring new evidence into the situation? Because it's there then there's new evidence.
We can, if we identify items that are new evidence in the record, then at the end, we will tell you to remove that from your consideration.
I think it's a little too late by then.
So Commissioner McGriff, I hear what you're saying, and there's, we talked about whether it made sense to jump in and interrupt and say, well, actually, that's not in the record, or what have you, and that would lead to, I think some problematic interchanges between staff and citizens. We want to have the citizens have the ability to do this, and what LUBA and the courts have allowed is for essentially when new evidence come in, and then at the end of the hearing, have the decision maker, the city commission, say, these things were new evidence, we're rejecting them and not considering them as part of our deliberation. And, that you're, to a certain extent, once they say it, it's out. And we can either correct the record immediately, or we can wait until later. And, if you prefer, we could jump in immediately. But we think it's a more effective hearing process to
Yes,
wait till
I respect your opinion, and I don't have an opinion about it, but, once heard, it's hard to unhear it. And I'm, reminded of being in court where they say the jury will disregard the comments, but it's out there already. So it's a contradiction in terms is what I'm pointing out, is that you're asking us to hear something that we unhear something that we've already heard. So
we understand we're asking you to do something that's difficult to do. As the saying goes, you can't unring the bell, but what Lube and the courts have said is, actually in these situations, you can. We trust our local decision makers to be able to do that.
And I trust the people testifying to not give new evidence.
Right, okay. So Commissioner O'Donnell, you had your hand raised, but I see it's down. Anything? Do you have anything?
No, I was just following the conversation. I was curious which individuals present among staff are going to be our filters for filtering out what is perceived to be new evidence.
Diliana Vasileva and myself. And then it's ultimately up to the applicant to identify as well.
Okay, so I think we're ready to get started with our testimony. So just to be clear, these are folks, I have the list, these are folks that gave comment during the Planning Commission process, and they have standing to provide testimony tonight. So Marty Gant, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Commission. A long, long time ago, 20 years ago, my wife and I decided to heed the call and help people. I don't think that when we started that, we thought we'd be sitting here today in the position we're in, helping not 10 or 20 or 100, but thousands of people. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the neighborhood's concerns, but I have a tremendous amount of desire to fulfill the need that those people on the streets have. I'm willing and able to accommodate some of the problems that have been occurring, but a great deal of the problems have been occurring over the course of 9 years, not recent. I have trained staff. We're more than capable of operating. We're heeding the call of the commission to apply for this permit rather than wait for an emergency resolution. We've met all the criteria, all the codes are there. So I urge you to approve it, but I also want you to know that I have every desire to work closely with the neighborhood, the association, with our immediate neighbors to resolve, to the best of our abilities, fix the issues, the misunderstandings. I had a meeting just 2 days ago with one of the neighbors, and it was a great meeting. I think there was a tremendous amount of understanding on both sides. And I don't want to downplay their hurts or their frustrations or their fears. But I would really want you to remember this is an emergency situation, and we're more than capable. The city, the county, and the state is depending on us. So with that, I ask that you approve. Any questions?
Mr. Kreisman, he still has time. Should we use this time for questions or wait until the rebuttal at the end?
It's entirely up to you. You can use the time now to question Mr. Gant, or you can wait until rebuttal, or whatever is the commission's preference.
I think I'm going to hold mine until the end. Does any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant at this time? All right. Commissioner O'Donnell, I see you have your hand up. I don't see your video, but I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I think it's timely to ask Mr. Gant. He's alluded to a community engagement program. Has that program ever existed or been required in the past? And if so, what is the history of that program? Was it actually implemented or never occurred?
The community engagement program in the past wasn't there. I'll be honest, it was a failure on our part to incorporate that, but it's there now. We're working closely with the neighborhood. One of the things that the neighborhood really wants is to partake in some of those rules and processes, and I'm more than willing to have them facilitate, help with, and make sure that the criteria that they are concerned about are in line with the concerns that we have. So we've met that requirement now. Is it in stone yet? I can't say that it is, because I'm going to meet with the neighbors and make sure that it meets their criteria too. So I hope I answered your question.
well, to clarify, what I'm trying to determine is that the Father's Heart institution has been there for quite a while. I, in fact, went and met with Terry Gant back when I was running for my first term and toured the facility. So was there actually a requirement at any time in the past for community engagement? And did that engagement, it did occur or did not occur?
There was never a requirement that I was ever made aware of, and I know Terry was not made aware of, so the answer to that was no, and we've brought that forth through this process.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, seeing no questions, no further questions at this time, thank you. I think you'll have the opportunity to provide rebuttal after all of the other testimony. All right, so the next up is Wendy Marshall. She is the representative of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. Neighborhood associations get 5 minutes.
Good evening, Commissioners, Mayor, and staff. I'm Wendy Marshall. Closer?
Yes.
Is this close enough?
There you go. That's much better.
I'm not usually accused of being quiet.
Well, don't hold back now then.
I do live in McLaughlin Neighborhood District, but I am speaking for McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. We did submit a memorandum on July 2nd, so I don't want to be repetitive, and I know a lot of the neighbors have details. I don't live on that end of town, so I don't personally have the story, so I want to save that for the neighbors. We do want to express that we support the mission. We think the vulnerable populations do need help, and we appreciate that. We do want a positive relationship with the organization. We do feel that with all the evidence that you've already been presented with and all of the issues, this site just doesn't accommodate the services. It doesn't serve the organization or their clientele. And we would like to see a different site being offered or being proposed that would serve them better. In the meantime, while they are on site, we think that a relationship with the neighborhood, a two-way relationship would be helpful. As it stands, we have the Good Neighbor policy, and then we have the community engagement plan, and they are good starts, but they appear to just be one way. Here's a piece of paper. The details are very, they're missing detail on how you implement, how you distribute. We've seen the Good Neighbor policy. It's shown to the staff or the clients. Where's the interaction? The community engagement plan, it describes the operation, but basically, unless I'm missing something and something's been revised, it ends with saying, here's a phone call, call us. And judging by the experiences of the neighbors, they have called multiple times, reported issues over the years, and it appears they have not been resolved. And once again, that's reported by the neighbors to us and not my own experience. Even in the conditions, and I'm not sure if I have the latest conditions, it's on page 67 of the staff report. Condition 3 says they shall finalize the community engagement plan and then give it to the neighborhood association. Where's the interaction? They were going to finalize it and give it to us, like it's done. And then the same with the required meeting. They're required to have a meeting with us to provide an opportunity for communication between the neighbors and the operators of the shelter. What is the outcome? Is there a required outcome of the meeting? Or is that just, you can tell us what you want, but nothing happens? And I think beefing up the conditions so there is some interaction and that the neighborhood's concerns do get addressed, that would be helpful. it's clear procedurally that we are not looking at the pre-existing day use. We're only looking at addition of the emergency overnight warming shelter. However, it's hard to separate the two uses. And if the pre-existing use was not already there, we would not have an opportunity to even have the conditional use, the expansion. So I feel like we need to look at it as a whole. And I totally understand the procedural necessities that was already approved, but that prior approval was not done with any neighborhood interaction. So we really feel that it needs to be looked at in the entirety of all of the uses that are going on in the proposed expansion of uses. Oh, I've got 40 seconds. I think that's it. Like I said, we do support their mission, and they do have their heart in the right place. We just feel like they need a better location for everybody involved. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so from here on out, I have a little stack here, and so I will call the names of 2 people at a time, so you can go ahead and come up. You'll each have 3 minutes. The timer is here. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Yeah, we'll start there. So first up is Sharon Nicholson, and after that will be Dale Gearing.
Hello. You can start the clock. My name is Sharon Nicholson. I live in Oregon City on Washington Street, directly across the street from the Father's Heart. I want to thank you all for this opportunity to speak regarding the conditional use permit. My approach tonight will just to be to call out the different areas in the application that don't seem to have been met, although they kind of contradict what the staff report has found. So it leads me to believe that it's interpreted, and so that is a concern I would just like to voice. So the Section A of the conditional uses, there are 5 criteria that should be met, and out of the 5, only there are 3 that, in my opinion, and what I believe are facts, have not been met. Criteria number 2 is around the characteristic of the site and its suitability, and it's specifically around the location. The shelter is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The way it's presented, it looks like it's in this mixed-use area, and I guess the plain facts are that's what it is, but the reality is it's in the middle of a neighborhood of families and children. And the McLaughlin neighborhood, we are maintaining these homes and we're following strict adherence to keep the city and the historical perspective intact, and the shelter kind of makes that difficult. And there are negative impacts based on the inappropriate activities on the surrounding area. And so I'd like to kind of echo what you've already heard tonight, that the shelter, whether day or night, it is not in a suitable location. So I just want to go on record. So the other criteria 4 is around the character of the neighborhood. The Father's Heart does not positively impact the character of this historic neighborhood and the district, and it negatively alters the character of the surrounding area. It draws people into it all days and all hours, and not everybody that is a patron is aware of what day it is, what time it is, how cold it is. They just come into the area. It is an attractive source of support and help for them. Unfortunately, they arrive after hours, and while we are looking at the good neighbor policy and an engagement with the neighborhood, there's no control of what happens after hours, which is where most of these problems occur. And it's at night, and the day use, or the day use shelter has its own problems, but the night use increases that because they're coming in and the shelter's not large enough to support all the people that are coming into the area. The other criteria not met is around those goals. So citizen involvement and neighborhood livability. The livability is significantly impacted by the shelter. Our ability to work outside without interactions with some of the clients doesn't happen. So I know I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to
You're out of time.
Yeah, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. All right, Dale Gearing.
My name is Dale Gearing. I'm a resident of Oregon City, McLaughlin neighborhood. I attended this month's Planning Commission meeting thinking I'd testify. Instead, I listened and learned so much. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about the process surrounding the siting and operation of Father's Heart. As a lifelong resident of the McLaughlin neighborhood, I have witnessed the effects of the changes brought into the neighborhood over the last 12 years. Many testified to their similar personal experiences, so I won't repeat that testimony. At the meeting, we were instructed by staff that the location was not the question, but we were to focus on process. What I'm about to say is based on the testimony from the meeting, and I'm glad to stand corrected if I misunderstood. Some points of process. The conditional permit was issued 12 years ago without input from those most affected, the neighbors. It was issued with the requirement of good neighbor agreement and annual neighborhood meetings. This has not happened. Many stated after 12 years, this is the first time they had a chance to give voice to their concerns. Currently, a good neighbor agreement is being drafted without the involvement of the neighbors. When asked what happens if the agreement is not met, the response is it's up to the two parties to resolve the issues. This seems like a formality and not a process of compliance. When the representative of Father's Heart was asked if they monitored their guests, it was clear that they had no responsibility for their action. They stated that they have a code of conduct for staying there. When asked what the code of conduct consisted of, he didn't know. This does not give me confidence that it's being used or even followed. The profile of those coming to the Father's Heart covers a wide spectrum of issues: drugs, mental health, prostitution, small percentage of seriously committing crimes. In testimony, it was shown that not everybody is ready to seek help and is not a condition of receiving assistance. In the staff report, as stated, passage of this amendment will bring improvement to the neighborhood. The reason given people will be brought inside. However, the majority of testimony was not about nighttime activity, although this is a problem. It was about how people's daily lives were affected during the day by a broad range of behavioral issues. Increased services will bring new referrals from the network agencies around the surrounding area. People will come, and when they come and it's full, they'll be in the neighborhoods at night. The report by staff also states there is no impact on budget. This is a concern because increasing services with little support of the neighbors outside of calling the police does not address the real needs of supporting such a facility and residents. There will be a cost, unbudgeted or not. Finally, it was stated that the governor has signed a bill directly citing the homeless shelters without having to pass the normal high threshold of land use planning. If this is the case and this vote carries, we will be setting a very low threshold to go even lower. If we were to follow the process, let's put it in place. That was supposed to be in place 12 years ago, and demonstrate that it works before moving forward. As we learn more as a community, let's also work together to find a location that meets everyone's needs and enhances livability for everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, the next two folks, I have Jessica Murray and Monica Wright.
Hello.
Hi.
I am Jessica Murray. I've lived at 612 12th Street in Oregon City since 2010. I am a newly elected member of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association Steering Committee with the goal of working with the Father's Heart to create an actual good neighbor agreement. However, tonight I am speaking as an individual and not representing the MNA. My husband and I have two children, ages 12 and 5, and the front of our house directly faces the Father's Heart. Our open front yard is 60 feet from the front of their building and parking lot where their guests congregate and wait to enter, with a completely clear line of sight. My front door is exactly 90 feet from their front door. The surrounding neighbors, as mentioned, didn't have an opportunity to respond to the previous day use applications, nor the emergency night use. And I can tell you from my personal experience and close proximity that the impact has been substantial. My previously submitted statements detail all those impacts and the many incidences we've experienced, both when the Father's Heart is open and also when they are not, from people coming into our neighborhood seeking services. While the current day use shelter is not the subject of this current application, those impacts are absolutely related and relevant. The night shelter is even more of a strain on the adjacent properties. During those many nights, there are people outside loudly talking or yelling out front, coming in at all hours of the night. I have also seen the police often called in the middle of the night with lights blaring into our windows. We have been frequently woken up by activities across the street. This proposed use does substantially impair the use of our property to get sleep in our own house, and additionally for my kids to feel safe playing in our front yard or walking to and from the bus stop. They have been accosted, yelled at, and chased from the bus stop by guests from the Father's Heart. Once someone came out of the shelter after a night use and tried to convince my children to leave with them. They didn't. Luckily, I really, truly value the work that the Father's Heart does deeply. And I know that they undoubtedly help a lot of people. Many of these people are good people, but unfortunately some are dangerous and some are in severe distress. That is not a gamble I want to take with my family's safety and security. We were not called to the service as the people from the Father's Heart were. It has been thrust upon us. One neighborhood is bearing the brunt to service an entire county, not just Oregon City. Marty Gant did come over and talked with me on my porch for 2 hours. We talked about things that can be done to lessen some of the impact, but the truth is that we both know it cannot be all resolved while they reside at this location. My husband asked Mr. Gant if he would like the Father's Heart to operate in his front yard or to live across the street from it. His honest answer was no. He did express a desire to move and an openness to find a new location, which he did say on the record at the Planning Commission meeting in his rebuttal. Mr. Gant told me, he's willing to move if he can find an affordable, better located building. I urge the city to help them find a new space this immediate winter for the night shelter, as well as eventually the day use. The applicants know the location and the size of the building are not suitable. We know the location is not suitable. This criteria is not met. Please do not align with the Planning Commission. Please deny this permit, and hopefully we can all work together to find them a better location that serves them and us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Monica Wright.
Good evening. I understand that the Father's Heart is providing a necessary service for its clients, but unfortunately, they really don't meet the conditions for this permit because they do alter the character of the neighborhood. And anyone who lives in the surrounding neighborhood knows it. We've all experienced harassment and threats and theft and violence from people who are visiting the Father's Heart. The building is too close to the surrounding neighbors. It is on one side, I don't have the measurements and I know they were in the staff report, but I couldn't find them again. It was like less than 40 feet away from the next door neighbor. The Father's Heart knows that a percentage of their clients are disruptive to the neighborhood, but when I have called them to talk about that, they have always dismissed my concerns and told me that they can't be responsible for their clients after they leave their property. The staff report advises that we call Oregon City Police Department or code enforcement, and they'll handle those complaints, but I have called the police on numerous occasions, and what they tell me is that, the person who's screaming at you is a client of the Father's Heart, and there's nothing we can do. If I'm lucky, they'll maybe do a drive-by and ask them to move along. And the idea that, you're gonna call code enforcement at 2 a.m. for a noise violation, and they're gonna come out to issue make them be quiet is not reasonable. There's no 24-hour code enforcement. And the meetings would be helpful to have meetings with the Father's Heart if they're actually willing to listen. But then again, if they won't take responsibility for what their clients do as soon as they leave the building, then what good is a meeting going to do? If they just say they're off our property, not our problem anymore. I don't really know what the answer is, but it seems like the site is not suitable for the Father's Heart. Because it really does have an effect on my children and my neighbors and my family also. I think that the city and the county should work together to help them find a suitable location where they're not in the middle of a residential neighborhood so close to the homes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we have Amanda Alwine and Amy Ha.
Hello, thank you for listening to my comments. My name is Amanda Alwine, and I live at 1102 Jefferson Street, which is approximately 2 blocks from the Father's Heart, and I have lived there since 2015. I have given public testimony at both Planning Commission meetings regarding the permit application for a night warming shelter at the Father's Heart. My argument has been and continues to be that the night warming shelter and the Father's Heart facility in general affects the livability of the historic McLaughlin neighborhood, and it should be denied. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to sit and talk with Marty Gant from the Father's Heart. This was a productive conversation where the air was cleared and also a partnership began to form, and I have great hope that we'll be able to work together going forward. Let me be clear, no one in our neighborhood wants our homeless neighbors to die from exposure this winter. No one. If there is no other option, then this permit should be granted. However, I remain steadfast in my belief that services at the current location of the Father's Heart should not be expanded. The current location is too small to provide adequate services to our growing homeless population, and it does impact the livability of the neighborhood for housed residents and also the businesses downtown. One thing that I think surprised Mr. Gant was the fact that I know many clients of the Father's Heart personally, and I do. I've met and helped many homeless people in our city, and what I can tell you is that we have homeless people here that have come from much farther away than just Clackamas County, and they're coming here for services. Our city has become the de facto place in Clackamas County for homeless people. Police from other cities such as Westland, Gladstone, and Canby bring homeless people from their communities here to ours, dropping them at the transit center, or as I learned yesterday, directly at the Father's Heart. Over 140 Oregon City residents signed an informal petition asking for this permit to be denied because we feel that we're on a precipice. We see the homeless crisis growing and coming to a head in Portland and Salem and across the country. We do not want the same thing to happen here in the historic McLaughlin neighborhood that many of us here in this room have worked so hard to preserve. With the sweeps of homeless encampments happening in Portland and Salem, as well as the end of the moratorium on evictions looming on the horizon, we can expect to see extreme growth in our homeless population. The Father's Heart needs a new facility, a bigger facility with a better location where they can do more and serve more people, and they need it now. And the people in this room can help them. We also need a comprehensive plan to help the homeless we already have in our community and others that are surely coming in the near future. It's up to you, our local government, to find a solution. We need a plan before things get out of control. In closing, I would like to add that I feel it's inappropriate to charge a nonprofit working so hard to help members of our houseless community a $5,000 fee for this permit. I ask that you please waive that fee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Amy Ha?
Yes, hello, my name is Amy Ha. I live in the McLaughlin district. I have lived there and raised my children for over 17 years. I want to begin by saying I am confident in expressing that every individual here does not disagree with the purpose or the philosophy by which the Father's Heart operates. But that's not what this meeting is about. This is specifically to determine whether or not the current application that the Father's Heart has applied for, a conditional use permit for emergency use, meets the qualifications and guidelines under the code. As McLaughlin neighborhood residents, we raise children in these communities. We own businesses. We are tax-paying citizens. We see what happens every single morning and night as a neighborhood in this community after an emergency use. We as a neighborhood are directly affected and our livability is directly compromised. Concerning condition 4, regarding the proposed use altering the character of the surrounding area, the Father's Heart has failed to meet this requirement. The influx of homeless individuals that come to the Father's Heart for emergency use are turned away for various reasons. They retreat to our neighborhoods, the residential neighborhood in which tax-paying citizens and families and business owners reside, where we raise our children. It alters our real estate values. It alters our safety, our character. It alters how we operate our businesses and how we send our children off to school every morning. There have been countless reports to the police department from tax-paying homeowners in regards to individuals from the Father's Heart perpetuating an illegal and dangerous activity in our yards and in our local parks. The Father's Heart has been operating on emergency use for years. This is not a new issue. This has been happening for years. In regards to Condition 3, the Father's Heart has mentioned numerous times about their good neighbor policy or community engagement plan. We have seen neither. They have had numerous opportunities to communicate this to the neighbors. There are alternatives to the Father's Heart emergency shelter. Just this past week, during the heat wave, the Development Services building in Oregon City opened their doors for cooling. They had cots, water, food available near our mental health offices, near our police department, near valuable services. There were numerous other cooling centers throughout the Clackamas County area that were available as well. The Father's Heart currently can accommodate 49 individuals. In addition, this is without the current COVID mandates and guidelines with social distancing that could apply. Why bring individuals into a neighborhood that cannot meet requirements for capacity and that doesn't have mental health and substance abuse resources available? These resources and shelters for emergency use and long-term should be located in more reasonable and safe areas that can accommodate and serve the population more appropriately and more responsibly. I urge you and I implore you to please deny this application for the Father's Heart that they have submitted. They have not met the requirements. Their emergency use shelter directly impacts the neighborhood livability, quality, and safety. Rule no, not on emotion, but based on facts. Thank you.
Ms. Ha. All right, next we have John Kyantosh and Carla Laws.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is John Kyantosh, and I'm a resident in the McLaughlin Conservation District on 10th Street, two blocks up Washington Street from the Father's Heart. I would like to state my objection to the night use permit for the Father's Heart. During winter cold spells, I understand the benefit of having off-the-street accommodations for the homeless people. There's a significant homeless problem in the Portland metropolitan area, and Oregon City increasingly shares this burden. But the 603 12th Street address of the Father's Heart is poorly suited for this charitable activity, and I'm opposed to the expansion of the social services activity in a residential neighborhood. Zoning matters, and this worthy outreach enterprise belongs in a suitably zoned commercial district. In the environmental planning community, there's the acronym NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, which stands for Not in My Backyard. It is usually referenced in a judgmental way, pointing out the hypocritical behavior of advocates who develop an aversion to an activity only when it encroaches upon their community. But there is a reality to the ubiquitous NIMBY idea. It is only hypocritical when there is no valid reason to not exist in a location. For example, imagine someone was a strong proponent of nuclear power because they would argue it doesn't have a carbon footprint, it does not dam rivers, and they believe it produces generally manageable levels of radioactive waste. But then when a nuclear power plant is proposed in their county, they reverse their position with NIMBY because they're concerned about potential contamination of their local environment. This is the essence of the NIMBY hypocrisy. It is okay if someone else is negatively affected, but if it is myself and my community, then it's not okay. But that hypocritical instance of NIMBY is not what's going on in this chamber tonight. Homeless people need help, and it is the greater community's moral responsibility to help facilitate this. But citing a facility like this in a residential district makes no sense. No one would advocate situating a homeless shelter in the center of an entertainment district, in a financial district, on a military base, in the middle of a national park, or in the central quad of a major university. These are all locations which are zoned for other purposes. I would argue that in a large residential district such as McLaughlin Conservation District, it's not the appropriate site either. The homeless population in our community could be better served by a nearby facility in a commercially zoned district. For example, there are large parcels of vacant commercial land 2 blocks downhill from the current 12th and Washington location along Main Street, or elsewhere in the county, perhaps where the mental health services are available. The relocation in a setting like that would help to maintain the proper separation of residential and commercial activities. And to be clear, a residential shelter for the homeless is not residential activity. After all, people sleep in hotels, but citing a hotel at 603 12th Street would be similarly inappropriate. Okay. For this reason, I have a substantial difference with the city assessment's evaluation of criterion number 4, that the proposed use will not alter the character of the surrounding area in a manner which substantially limits, impairs, or precludes the use of surrounding properties for the primary uses that they're intended. The character of the surrounding neighborhood has already been affected.
Sir, you're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Laws.
My name's Carla Laws, and I live in Oregon City. I'm also a volunteer for Barclay Hills Neighborhood Association. We're a neighboring, neighborhood association nearby. I'm coming as myself. I'm a little bit concerned, obviously we know there was never any process done with this facility. I feel for the homeless. And I feel like, obviously, from my own experience and from what I've seen, that it's done a disservice not only to the community there in the historic homes, but also for the homeless. And we've seen this scenario ourselves on Roosevelt Street. And we had a nonprofit come in overnight, run by a child sex offender, and he manages a house for women and children. And this concern, people come in, you can't identify people who come in. They don't necessarily have ID on them. And technically right now, in my neighborhood, on my street, there are one house moved in that had no idea what happened, but all the children that lived between Warren and Ulera on Roosevelt Street are gone. There's no children, and it's so upsetting to me. When this had happened, they told my neighbors to move if they didn't like it. Can you imagine a home established and they tell us to move? I'm just like, I feel for these families. If we care about Oregon City, if we care about building Oregon City, families and children should come first. And I sympathize with the homeless. I want them to be built up. I've seen people being helped, but the problem is it should not sacrifice the community of families and children. And that is my biggest concern. And we're a neighborhood where we have also in Barclay Hills and in McLaughlin churches running in our neighborhoods. And if we allow this particular to be a warming shelter with no conditional use, what's going to happen to all the other churches? What about someone just coming in and opening a transitional home with no process? And if this is allowed to go through, I've even seen it where Mike Cross himself announced on Oregon City Chit Chat he's opening another house. And when they open a house and they don't go through a process, it does not help the homeless, it doesn't help the people in need, and it doesn't help the neighbors. So I please want you to consider that. I know a process is now being happening, but we need to think about the future for Oregon City on homes and facilities like this in the future and how they establish and think about our communities. I appreciate you for listening, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Laws. All right, we have 2 more commenters. We have Terry Popino and Jay Pierce. Popino? You can correct Commissioner McGriff over here, who just corrected me. How do you? She said it correctly? Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Popino. So much better. I live in the McLaughlin neighborhood, and I have since 1983. I I want to be clear that my concerns are about behavior and not about housing status. And I want to speak to the requirement or the part of the code that says it shouldn't alter the capacity of the neighborhood. And I would like to say that I believe it does alter the capacity. Because it brings people into the neighborhood 24/7 on those days when the warming shelter is open. I had an experience a week ago, Sunday, where a woman was shooed out of downtown and told, go someplace else. And she knew of the Father's Heart, so she came up. She didn't realize that it was Sunday and the Father's Heart was not open. And this woman was in dire straits. I don't know if you remember the weather, it was really hot. And she was really high. She was under a bush at a neighbor's house, directly kitty corner across the street from the Father's Heart. And she was clutching her dead pet pigeon, whom she had named Lovely. And the bird died from heat. I'm looking at it going, I don't think that bird's alive. And then she cried and later told me that it wasn't. But what I'd like to speak about the capacity is when places are recognized as the go-to for things as important as homeless services, they need to be able to provide services. And when they don't provide services or they can't provide services, it falls on the neighbors. It falls on us to provide services. So I did. I administered first aid. I got a wet towel and I washed her face and I wrapped it around her head and I told her, she was incoherent at this time, just not responsive. And I said, okay, I'm going to put a little bit more water on this. You're going to feel it. And as I began to talk to her, I got her name, and that she thought the Father's Heart was open and available to help her. She wasn't able to walk. She did not want services. She didn't want to talk to the police. She did not want to go to the hospital. And she had been laying in the sun. This was 2:30 in the afternoon, since at least 9:30 that morning, with no water, no nothing. And I could only do so much. It's not a police problem. The police don't have resources to deal with these circumstances. So I just want to let you know that expanding services without providing support for that has a tremendous amount of impact on capacity for the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Pierce?
I was waiting for the clock.
Oh,
there we go.
Sorry.
Yes, my name is Jay Pierce. I live at 1214 Washington Street in Oregon City. I'm directly adjacent to the Father's Heart property. And I asked the city commission to deny the application and that this conditional use not expand the services of the Father's Heart. For many of the reasons that people have stated here, I submitted a fairly detailed response myself to the Planning Commission, but I don't think you can separate the two zoning issues with all due respect because the original conditional use was granted without the public process we're seeing here. And frankly, I think that's why you see so many people in the room, both here and at the Planning Commission. This facility is not adequate for its current use, much less an expanded use. I am not opposed, as you've heard from all of our neighbors here, as are none of the residents of the McLaughlin neighborhood community. We're not opposed to the goals and the purposes of these very humanitarian individuals who are trying to contribute to the community through their efforts. But there are and have been efforts underway for many, many years under the Homeless Solutions Coalition, and I have emphasized the word Solutions Coalition, that exists now countywide. It started out as an Oregon City organization and has expanded to a countywide effort to find solutions for our growing homeless problem. And there are many solutions that have been proposed, and in fact, some facility conscious efforts are underway at the county level to deal with the mental health problems, the addiction problems, the abuse problems that do exist within this homeless population, in addition to some who don't seek help. And that's a separate issue among how these people could be treated. But as far as the bus routes and facilities, there are many that exist within the county that would be more adequate sized and shape, if you will, to deal with these problems that we see. A street shelter should have rooms. There are places in the county that do have the facilities for both warming, cooling, treatment, feeding, clothing. There's a lot of very complex issues, obviously, that have to be dealt with here, but we would ask that you consider solutions for consolidation of Father's Heart's goals with the city, county efforts that are already underway to find solutions for our homeless problem.
Thank you, sir.
Please deny this, the expansion request.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, so that concludes all of our public comment. Ms. Turway, do you want to address the any exclusions at this point in time, or after the applicant's rebuttal?
I would suggest after the applicant's rebuttal, and then he can identify issues, and then if there's any left over, we'll follow up.
Okay. All right. Mr. Gant, you have 5 minutes for applicant's rebuttal.
Thank you. I've been taking lots of notes and given lots of thought to this, and there's obviously some frustration, and it hurts to hear some of the things. The problem I have with some of it is and I don't want to diminish a problem, but it's how much is being indicated as being a problem. And that we came into I've heard the words darker than night and all these different things that we didn't do. But the big thing that I want to stress to you is the things that we are doing. We currently have over 100 homeless people housed through a program with the county. It came through our doors and we helped them seek housing. It's temporary, but we're also working to get permanent housing. The point is, we're in the solution business to help these people get off the streets. I can't fix the mental health crisis. This lady that was that was found on the side of the road, she was having a mental health crisis, and I'm not sure what we were led to believe to be done, although we have mental health within our building now. We have client, what do I want to say? We have the proper employees, if you will, case management that have those kinds of abilities. We're working with the Oregon City Police Department's mental health. I've also spoke with the management, emergency management, and they're willing to provide mental health program or person on site during night shelter. We've been told we don't communicate. We had a Zoom meeting in March with the association. We were told that Mr. Buss would get back to us. He never did. So we sent an email to him. So the point is that in the efforts to communicate, sometimes we're not communicated with either. I in no way want anyone here to think that I'm downplaying the impact on individuals here. But I also want you to remember the impact on the individuals that we serve. And they're in the numbers of thousands, not hundreds. When it comes to keeping people warm and safe, it's right in line with what's happened with the heat. The heat killed people. I don't think our community wants to be part of that. What I'm willing to say on public record is I'm willing to enter in negotiations and processes that will help our community. And if I need to relocate, I will. But I can't just do it today. What I'm dealing with here is a permit to get us through this winter. But I have a whole year before the following winter, and it is my hope that we can resolve these problems for everyone. Is that facetious to think that can happen? I hope not. Because I've had a meeting with the community. I've had two individuals that I met with, and I felt like both individuals could fill our heart and our desire to facilitate this. I want to remind you that I'm doing this at the urging of the commission. The emergency response is going to come in November, and you're going to have a need. One last thing, I got a minute 37. We talk about overflow. We always find somebody in bed, so we don't just put somebody on the street or for full. It's an emergency resolution. We have rules. We have a process. We've been very successful. But more than anything, no one's died on our watch. So I hope that you can see all the angles or all, that's not the right word. All the emotion. Understand there's two sides to this story. And I think you've heard all the testimonies and you see where we're at. So thank you very much. Any questions?
I imagine there probably will be some questions for the applicant. Do we want to ask questions now? I think we probably should. Anybody want to start? Anybody have questions for the applicant? Last chance.
Well, I guess I'll throw my hat in the ring. I guess Mr. Gant is, it's better late than never. Having the meetings now seems a little disingenuous to me when there has been opportunities over the years to have meetings with the community to explain or to help minimize situations. And if the criteria we have for the city only involved good deeds, it would be a different story, but that is not what we are looking at. This is not, you cannot do this based on emotion. We can't do this based on intentions. We have to look at criteria and standards, and I know that better than anybody else sitting in this room, except for maybe Mr. Gebeisman. So I guess I have a concern with, I know you mean well. I know your heart is in the right place. I don't really see how, if you can make assurances to the people that are here and who are not here about how things are going to change. And that's my concern because it's been a long time coming. There's been no changes. So maybe that's a big question that can't be answered tonight, but it's something to think about. There are two sides to every story, as you've stated, definitely, for sure. And there's probably a third and a fourth side that we're not really seeing because we're not in a parallel universe. So I guess that's the question. Actions speak louder than words.
So if I'm understanding the question is, why did we wait and what assurances have we going forward?
Exactly.
Okay, so this has been a long process, and the communication between the ministry, and you have to also remember, my wife ran the ministry for 5 years before I now am running it. And so the communication between the two was inadequate apparently in the minds of those that live there, but in our minds, we were always open door. We always talked about that. We've invited commission members. We've invited anyone to come by. I'm not comfortable going door to door. I'll be honest with that. Now, I've been told I should go to door and explain. In today's world, I'm not sure that's the right way to go about it, but my point is today, I'm willing to do what's necessary. I'm willing to open up the dialogue. Can I fix all the problems? No. But I don't want to be thought of as these are so severe that I'm willing to put people at risk. It's necessary to have us open at night when it's cold. Should we be somewhere else? There are people that believe we should. And I'm of the belief that possibly we should, but I can't change it today. I assure you, I will do everything I can to make it better. And I've met with 2 members. They've already talked about it. I'm willing to do that even further. I'm willing to work with city officials. I think we're a light in the homeless problem. We are fixing, we are housing, we're resolving issues, and we're making productive citizens out of some of these people that people really didn't think they would become that. I could come up with hundreds of situations that were mental health issues, and today they pay their rent, they pay their electric bill, they buy their own food. I could go on and on. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Carl, do you have any questions?
So what is your mental health staffing capacity at the moment, and how has that changed over the years, over the last decade or so?
Well, I think it's really important to know that I have 5 case managers now that are managing properties that have homeless people. And one of the things that's really important is that I have a case manager on site every day. We're discussing the idea of having a case manager at night, and then I got approached by a gentleman from the state for emergency management, and he said that he would provide an employee with mental health capabilities as far as de-escalation, working through it, knowing what to do. So it's really important to know that I'm working towards having mental health solutions within our building, outside our building, daytime and nighttime. Can I solve all these mental health problems that are out there? No, but I can tell you that we're working towards that, and we're trying. So I think the answer is I have a case manager on site, and my plan is to have a case manager at night that's qualified and trained. Okay?
Thank you.
Commissioner Smith or Commissioner O'Donnell?
I don't have any questions for Mr. Gant. I do have staff questions probably at some point.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I have no questions simply because I have spent a lot of time looking into this. I've watched the Planning Commission. I recognize the narrowness of our decision tonight, and that decision, when I do make it, will be based upon the facts presented in the reports and the information I've gathered and the viewing of the Planning Commission. And it will be very narrowly construed, and whatever finding I make will be based upon those things that have been presented. So thanks, no questions.
All right, thank you. So Mr. Gant, I do have a couple of questions. Have you turned any people away at night when you've operated when we've given you emergency shelter provision? Have you turned anybody away?
I'm going to tell you that probably 4 years ago, there was some behavior issues with some people that came to our ministry. And we didn't have Clackamas County support in the sense of where to put those people. We couldn't have them housed in our building because they were so disruptive. So I'm going to tell you that we have, but that's been years ago. That's been resolved. Today, Clackamas County has other resources. So if we get max, or we have an individual that just doesn't fit our house Because you have to remember, this is a house for the night. It's something, they're there, they're getting fed, they're getting warm, and one person can upset 48 others really quick. So there's other locations that might be better suited for them, or they have other friends there. So we're really working closely with those other agencies to house those people. No one's going to go cold on our watch, and we will find some place for them, but not necessarily in our building.
So there's another service provider that you call that can come and pick up someone and take them to
We would normally Uber them over or find a way to get them there, because there's other, and I don't have that list today because they negotiate those every year. Who was a shelter last year might not be this year, and so on, because of staffing, because of different things. But we work closely with the county on those.
Okay.
We've sent people to Molalla. Molalla sent people to us, as an example.
Okay. And then the drop-offs that are occurring, I assume by police officers of other jurisdictions, do those occur at night or all hours?
I would say it's rare at night, but I'm not going to tell you it's not, because it's happened. If a police officer comes across a homeless person and they're freezing to death, they're going to find a place for them. So they have dropped them off. We've also had ambulances drop off people that were discharged from hospitals because they sent them to us to keep them safe. We have a curfew at 10 o'clock. Our doors are locked. We have an intake process. They come. We intake as necessary, and we find them a bed if we have one. And so the staff that's on duty know where the empty beds are, so we're not intruding upon everybody else. We intake them, we take all the information, we get them warm, and and in some cases we even feed them before they put them down. How many times that happens is really minimal. But I'm not going to tell you it doesn't happen, because it has.
But I guess the issue is we have to split this day versus night thing. So I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page. So drop-offs occur during the day and they occur at night.
Occasionally, but I want to make sure that I stress to you it's not very often, but it has happened.
And then I believe your application said that if someone came past the 10 p.m. curfew, that then they're let in, they go through the process.
We would let them in, because we're not going to leave them in the cold. That's not going to happen. If we're maxed, then we're already, if we're full and we know somebody might come in the door. So once we're full, now we're looking for resources already. So that's already done. So if we have a person come, we're going to find a bed for them and we're going to get them there.
Okay. That's all the questions I had, just for clarity's sake. Commissioner O'Donnell.
When I watched the planning commission meeting, the question was posed to Mr. Gant, are your clients free to leave whenever they want? And is free to leave at whatever hour of the evening they want. It's not a program where they sign on and have to be there by a certain hour and are committed to stay until the end of the evening in the morning. Is that still the case?
Yes. Now, the point that I think is important is that I can't refuse. They're not prisoners. So they can come in, they sign in, we do all the documentation, we feed them. But at 2 o'clock, you have to realize some of these people have issues, and being confined in a building for some of them isn't conducive to their mental health. We've had people very cold get up and leave. I can't prevent that. But I encourage them not to. Is that
if they were to leave in the middle of the night, say one. No, I just wanted a clarification because the question was dealt with before. But my follow-up question is, if they were to leave at 1 or 1:30 in the morning, could they then return at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or whatever?
I think it has to do with behavior and has to do with, they're not supposed to, and our rules say you leave, you don't come back. I can honestly say, in all the years that I've done this, I cannot remember someone that left that came back. Would they, if they came back and they were cold, I'm going to let them in the door. I'll figure it out. But it just doesn't happen. So I don't want to downplay it and say that it won't, but Circumstances are what they are.
Thank you.
So I have one more follow-up question. So your application says that you had already implemented a good neighbor program, which had a set of rules and requirements regarding noise and smoking, and in the rules, it talks about behavior on or on nearby properties. Do you feel like, well, I guess two questions. Just for clarity's sake, has this program been implemented prior to this point in time?
Yes, the good neighbor policy or the behavior policy or the attitude that we take with the clients, we've been telling them for a long time, you have to be a good neighbor. And if you're not complying with the expectation we have the right to terminate services. And in some cases we have. One of the things that we deal with, and again, I don't want to downplay what they've experienced as a neighborhood, but some of the neighborhood behavior issues have nothing to do with us because they've never been in our doors, they've never been served. Identifying who has been served and who hasn't is a tough one, but I do know that there are drug deals throughout Oregon City, Clackamas, Gladstone, and so on, with people that have nothing to do with Father's Heart. But because of association, we're lumped in there. Again, I can't tell you how much I want the public to know I hear you and I want to help. But don't put all of the issues on us. We're helping.
Seeing no other questions, I think we'll let you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And Mayor Elspeth, before you move on, during the rebuttal period, Elizabeth Hart called in. So I would ask, well, if you would like to take that comment or whether the procedure, which way that would go.
Does she have testimony?
She's registered as a regular individual.
So it sounds like the call came in during the rebuttal. After it was closed to most testimony. So you do not have to let her testify. If you do, you would have to let the applicant rebut whatever testimony came in at that point.
I guess my question was, we've confirmed that she has standing to testify?
She's not listed on our list.
She is able to testify.
Okay. So it's up to the commission then. Okay, so I'm going to make this easy. If you support hearing the testimony and potential rebuttal, give me a thumbs up. If you do not, give me a thumbs down. All right, 2 and 2, and you're waiting on me. Of course. All right, I'm going to give thumbs up. I want to collect all the testimony, be as open as possible. Miss Elizabeth Hart has 3 minutes.
Elizabeth, could you press *6 to unmute yourself?
Ms. Hart, can you hear us? Commissioner O'Donnell, you're muted.
I have a question for staff. What is Ms. Hart standing to give testimony? Did she previously provide testimony?
So Commissioner O'Donnell, in discussion with staff about the ability to testify, the limitation on people to testify is limited to appeals. So if there's an appeal, only those people who testify before the Planning Commission can testify on appeal. In this case, we don't have an appeal. What we have is a recommendation for approval because it's a type 4 process. It had to come to you regardless without an appeal. There was no appeal filed, and so there isn't a limitation on standing in this situation.
Okay, so I was in error in asking if she had standing to testify.
Yeah, that.
Okay, last chance. I'm going to call last chance for Ms. Hart. If you
Hi, can you hear me?
There you go.
Hello, can you
All
hear
right.
me? Oh, I am so sorry. Thank you so much. I was muted. My name is Liz Morris. Thank you so much for hearing me out. I'm a homeowner on 11th Street within 1 block of the Father's Heart. This is the historic McLaughlin neighborhood, which has been a model for how to manage historic communities across the U.S. We pour all of our time and money into maintaining these landmark homes and creating a strong, safe neighborhood. And we are a compassionate community, and we all support the Father's Heart mission. We know that their services can save lives and change lives, and sometimes it's people's only hope. Nearly all of us in the community contribute food, money, and serving the homeless community in many ways. But this child-filled community is not the place for a homeless shelter or to expand the current services. We're already experiencing too much crime associated with Father's Heart visitors. While 90% of those served may be respectful people, that still leaves dozens of people roaming our sidewalks who are dangerously unstable, some of whom are criminals, and they harass us in our own yards. There's at least usually one person screaming up and down the street, sometimes more. People are camping in the woods all around Father's Heart, all the way down to the river, actually. You can't walk down there safely during the warm nights, waiting for it to open on the cold nights, and they fill the woods with trash. Some are wasted on drugs, on our sidewalks, and in our playgrounds with our children. They sometimes break into our cars and our houses and often tear our trash apart and leave it in the streets. Some are sleeping and defecating in our yards, and there's no solution for us. There's no resolution. It's made our community totally unsafe, and it's spilling into the historic downtown and degrading the community there as well. We've had to rebuild our fence this year that was broken down and a homeless camp set up inside our own yard. I'm afraid to be in my own house alone. This is not the place for services that Father's Heart is providing. Expanding these services will only expand the problem that we are already experiencing. And primarily, two of the criteria have not been met for this proposed use, which is the characteristics of the site suitable for the proposed use. This location is not suitable. And will it alter the character of an area? It already has altered the character of the area, and expanding it will only continue to do so. Thank you so much for hearing my testimony. That's all.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gant, you have the opportunity for a rebuttal.
I think it's important to understand that we're not expanding our services. We've been doing this, so it's not an expansion. There's an assumption of who's doing the damage in the community. And again, the Father's Heart gets tied to that, and I understand that. But if you were in our building and met with our clients, you would realize that a great deal of the problems within our community are going to be there whether we're there or not. The presence of the Father's Heart isn't all of the problems. So I think that it's important you realize all we're doing to mitigate the homeless crisis within our community in Clackamas County. We've housed hundreds. To think that we haven't just come by, we have the data, we have the statistics, we have the information, and we're going to house more. So, I understand she's upset. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So at this point, I think we're going to need to take a break very shortly. Do you have a short list or a long list of things that we're supposed to forget that we heard?
Just three.
Three? Okay, so then why don't we go ahead and hear that while we're on the topic.
Staff identified new information in this hearing as the two conversations Mr. Gant had with the neighbors since the last Planning Commission meeting, information about the Clackamas County Cooling Center, and then the information about Roosevelt Street and a house there.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Turway. All right, so, okay, so at this point, I am going to close the public hearing just so that that piece of administration is done. I don't need to gavel. And we will take a break before we begin city commission discussion and decision. So let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 9:27-ish. Are you ready, Jacob? Yep. All right. Well, I'm going to call our session back to order, our regular meeting back to order. We've reached the point of city commission discussion, questions for staff, our deliberation. I'd like to keep this organized, so maybe we'll go one by one. If you have additional questions that come up, I don't know. I'm trying to keep from being like a 45-minute free-for-all, just forever discussion. So let's try to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk and ask their questions. Probably before, maybe it's a question time, I would say, before you just state your general opinions. I think we all have a lot of general opinions, and I have a few thoughts on providing clarity of my own positions too. So maybe we'll focus on staff questions first. Does anybody need any staff questions? I think Commissioner Smith, you said maybe you had some questions earlier, or?
Yes. One of my questions would be, this is, my understanding is, so I'm getting a lot of feedback.
To get anybody better now, Commissioner Smith?
I don't know. Let's find out. Test. That's better. So there's been some testimony. Mr. Gant mentioned this in the meeting tonight, that he feels like he's been led to this path by the commission, meaning the conditional use permit process. The Father's Heart has definitely come to the commission in the past for emergencies for the warming shelter, so I do believe this is not an extended use or expanded use, because it has been the same warming shelter for the last 4 years. I guess what I'm wondering is, if the conditional use permit is not granted by the city for the use of the warming shelter, what are the other options in order for the warming shelter to, would the applicant come back again in just an emergency form like was done in the past, or would that just not, the warming shelter would just not exist?
So, Commissioner Smith, it's a good question, and I think the answer is, if this conditional use were denied, they could come back and request another emergency authorization. There was also some discussion in the Planning Commission, and, you know, it's not in front of the city now, but there is House Bill, I believe is 2006, that allows the establishment of shelters. So there are other paths to what the applicant wants to do here that could result in something similar or something different.
So I guess it's a question to my fellow commissioners. If, you know, we've kind of made the point in the last couple years that we did not want this coming back as an emergency every year, and that's why we kind of, as a commission, urged the applicant to kind of go this direction. So if we deny it, then what is our response to that as a commission? I'm concerned about that. Because I'm not sure that that's really solving any problem. I know that clearly most of us agree that there needs to be some sort of shelter for people in the winter months. So I'm worried, that we don't have an answer for that if there's no other options. So that's one concern. I guess I'll leave it at that for right now. I'll listen to the conversation as it goes forward.
Yes, so I'll share my opinion on your question that you asked the commission, because it's one of my notes that I thought about as well, about this this idea that because we've given them emergency use for the last several years, that has made it become an existing service. I don't look at it that way. I feel like it came to us as an emergency every time, and we were not establishing something forever through that process. So I did not feel like, because maybe it happened a couple of years, that meant that service would be granted forever. And the reason that we were headed down this road for permitting, in my perspective, was because we wanted this dialogue. We wanted this conversation. We wanted the neighborhood to be involved. We wanted to beef up the process. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will approve the permit. My concerns about approving a permit, a conditional use permit, is I think it's going to be much, much, much harder to take that decision back. Whereas an emergency resolution, it is temporary. So I like the conversation about helping them move to another building or move to another location. What can the city provide? Because I do think that's a conversation that we should be having, because I agree with the neighborhood. I don't think this, and the owner, that I don't believe this is the best location. So for me, that weighs into the conversation or the decision for me. So that's how I look at the permit process, was that it expanded this conversation. It allowed the neighborhood to be involved. That permit process also applies to other places in the city. If there's a church or somewhere else, it's another neighborhood, it's some other area, and I want them to have the opportunity to have that conversation and be a part of the process. So that's the reason I look at it and kind of are separate. I felt like what we set up was citywide, and was to try to prevent the situation. This situation to me is unique because the facility was already established, and therefore we're kind of dealing with an established situation, whereas a new shelter that was trying to be set up that would need a conditional use permit, I would want them to go through this more robust process for our consideration going forward. So that's my take, Commissioner McGriff. I think you had...
Yeah, I'm going to concur with you. Part of my concern is that the entire staff report reads that there's an entitlement here, and I agree with you, there is no entitlement. We have a non-conforming use, that there was a type 1 that never received any notice or anything of that sort, and unfortunately, I cannot separate the two things because one does not exist without the other. I'm presuming we could have an emergency warming shelter without a day shelter. You could have a day shelter without an emergency facility. So we've had testimony that basically linked the two things. And as much as our attorney is going to tell us they are not linked, they are. There are some people in this room tonight who were at a neighborhood meeting that Mr. Gant did not attend because Mrs. Gant was there, and there was no conversation. It was a fait accompli, as I will say. And if we had had this conversation that we're having now some years ago, I don't think we would be here, to be honest with you. I think we would be in a completely different situation. I support what you're talking about in terms of the only way, and I actually asked this question when we were going through the emergency declarations, and I voted against several of them, not because I don't support people getting out of the cold, is that I wanted to add some conditions to it, that there would be some discussion, that people would be notified, that there would be some sort of agreement between the community and the warming shelter. And I was told that we couldn't do that, and I asked why. And I was given a lot of legalese as to why we couldn't do that, which is why I ended up voting no. So, Mr. Smith, I agree with you. in the sense that if we look at going back to an emergency declaration, the only way that I would support that is under some couple of strict conditions, and I would be able to support that at this time. Did not get any support on that suggestion last time. So thank you for bringing it up.
All right, are there any other questions for staff?
As you can well imagine, I'm not sure when it's appropriate, but I have copious notes.
Well, I was just trying to, I'm sure things will come up.
Yeah, so we can go through stuff, and if I've got notes on it, I'll speak up, but.
I guess the only question I have, one of our public commenters mentioned the fee, the permit fee. It is a hefty fee for the conditional use permit, so my question to staff is what happens if the permit is denied? Is there any refund or anything like that? I think I know your answer, but.
If the permit is denied, there is no refund. The cost of the permit is the price of facilitating the process. It doesn't buy a decision.
Okay. All right, so.
Well, your question is probably going to the next question, which is, would we be interested in making some accommodation? And I don't know if that's where you were going with it, but.
Well, no, I don't think we could go down that route.
I know, because then everybody else will ask for it.
Right. All right, so general discussion. We need to try to deliberate and get to some decision. I
can see Frank staring at me.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Kabizman and I were just having a conversation about House Bill 2006. We referenced it earlier.
I think it's 4006, right?
No.
2006.
I can't hear you.
It is 2006.
Oh, okay.
And I guess we just want to make sure that there's an understanding of what that House bill says. We referenced it earlier. I just want to make sure that it was understood. I guess if nobody has a question about House Bill 2006, we won't address it anymore. But, after some previous things that have occurred, we just want to make sure that there's an understanding of what that says so there's no misunderstanding later.
Yeah, I thought about that when some of the public comments, somebody said something that triggered my thought and about these types of shelters popping up in other areas of the city. And I think you're going to be unhappy with some of the legislature's bills that were passed in this past session, if you feel that way, because they did really expand where local governments have lost their ability to control these decisions. And this is just one bill as an example, but it is worth noting. I did see a piece of it in the staff report where it was brought up, and I think you mentioned that the applicant chose to go this route versus the House Bill 2006 route, so maybe it would be worth letting us know what that is.
Yeah, and so chose might be the wrong word because the bill came out after the application was already filed. So, but just to let you know, what it says is that a local government shall approve an application for the development of a use of land for an emergency shelter as defined in this act on any property, notwithstanding ORS Chapter 195, 197, 196, 215, or any statewide plan, rule of the LCDC, or local land use regulation, zoning ordinance, regional framework plan, functional plan, or comprehensive plan. If the emergency shelter includes sleeping in restrooms, will comply with applicable building codes, located within an urban growth boundary, won't result in the development of new building that is sited in a natural hazard area, has adequate transportation access, will not pose any unreasonable risk to public health or safety. And so, there are some conditions, but I think those are pretty thin, and given the legislative history, it's going to be awful tough to say no to an emergency shelter that comes in on that door. And note again, it says any land.
And at this point, this really hasn't been tested. Right? It's relatively new, but once again, this is just clarification of what we were referencing in that staff report, so that there's, however this decision is decided, let's say it's decided to not allow it, I just want you to, there is a potential another route.
We also may have an option.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, you know, again, I'm looking at this, what you just read, and, you know, I think it could be adjudicated that what is adequate transportation access will not pose an unreasonable risk to public health and safety. I think that, you know, I'm sure tomorrow I could go out and find a lawyer and they could argue that, because that's what we do.
Yes.
So
that's one thing.
I understand that.
Okay.
It said it will not result in a new building. So does that mean that somebody could come in and build a new building somewhere in any place, that's anywhere, and as long as it has restroom facilities and sleeping facilities, they could put it, let's say, next door to my house?
That's correct.
And it would be a new building?
What the restrictions on new building is if the new building will be sited in a
Right,
natural
I see that,
hazard
in
area or
natural hazards
floodplain.
and floodplains, et cetera, et cetera.
So if it's not in one of those areas, they could build it.
All right, so, and that bill became effective upon signing? They
Yes.
declared an
There's an
emergency?
emergency clause that made it
And so
effective.
it trumps historic review or anything of that sort?
Yes.
I think we're going to court, but that's okay.
Okay, so that's for another night, but I appreciate you letting us know, because I think it's good for the city commission to know that that is applicable law that's out there. It's good for the folks that are here in the room to hear the public that are here for public testimony to know that sometimes, or maybe it's becoming more frequent, where local land use laws are being overridden by state laws. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I was about to say that important to understand that tonight's application was not made under that House bill. Tonight's application was made under an entirely different set of guidelines, and those are the guidelines that we are to consider in tonight's decision.
And Commissioner O'Donnell, you're absolutely correct. This House Bill 2006 is not in front of the commission tonight.
All right. Is anybody, are you ready to move to a vote or a motion? I guess you all are very, very quiet, so I guess I'll start with areas where I disagree with the staff report. And it's largely around livability. And the comment or the statement about neighborhood character, and also tied to this conversation about an extension or expansion of services versus the services already being there. So I think all of this conversation is there. It sounds, the staff report was written as if these services were essentially already established because of the emergency resolutions. I think we've tackled that. I didn't feel like we had permanently established those services, so I don't agree with that finding that therefore all of these conditions that we're talking about aren't new. I think when I listen to the neighborhood, I'm pretty confident that the folks that they bought their house, that they would say that the things have changed in their neighborhood, and I don't believe that livability should come at the expense or disproportionate expense to a particular neighbor or a neighborhood. So that is where I'm struggling. The daytime, nighttime difference that you have asked us to consider, I do feel like nighttime is different. It's different from a safety perspective. When I walk out this building at night is different than if I were to walk out that building at noon in the middle of the day. Things are different at night. There are safety concerns, and I think we generally have a requirement to sleep during the night, and therefore we likely, I don't know the ordinances, but I'm sure we have some noise ordinances, and I think noise and that nighttime activity comes into play, and that is the area where I'm focused on, where I do not agree with the staff report, and I believe that I could make my decision based off of that. I do feel like the neighborhood at the same time made some really good points. I think the neighborhood plan, the way it's currently written, the condition of approval, Unfortunately, I agree with them that I feel like the way it's written is just a checking of the box. There's no opportunity for the neighborhood to provide feedback and for there to be a dialogue as part of that condition of approval. So if this commission as a whole decides to approve the conditional use permit, then I would ask you to consider modifying that conditional use to broaden and expand the requirements for that neighborhood plan and the interaction with the neighborhood, maybe a draft and revisions and a final, multiple meetings, not just one meeting. If we're going to make this real and we're going to make it where it makes a difference, I think it has to have a little bit more requirements. Otherwise, as you said, they could show up at a meeting, and this is not specific to Father's Heart, but hypothetically, someone could show up at a neighborhood meeting and check that box and not have the results and leave the neighborhood maybe just as frustrated as they were before. So that's where I am at, but I would love to hear from other commissioners.
I have a laundry list. As I stated earlier, that I also believe that the staff report was biased in terms of trying to establish an entitlement, which wasn't there. I really feel that the application minimized statements. Because no changes are proposed to the building or existing site, it will not significantly alter the character of the surrounding area. By virtue of the building having openings that face the residential area on 3 sides, it does impact. The existing building does impact what's going on in the neighborhood, because just like today, queuing. So the agreement that they have, there were people loitering, smoking, they were feeding pets. I mean, I saw everything in the last 3 or 4 days as I've gone by every day, and I use Washington Street quite regularly. I don't think that through no fault of their own, the applicants have not met the criteria, and you have to meet all of them. You can't just meet one of them by saying we had a meeting. The applicants have a mission, and the neighborhood has a mission in general to have enjoyment of their homes, be able to be in their yard. And I agree with what Mr. Gant said, that we can't say that all of the crime stats in that zone of the McLaughlin neighborhood are directly due to them, but I do know that they went up after the facility opened. And that was presented by our neighborhood liaison officer at a meeting. What I'm concerned about is some of the statements in the report are not substantiated. They're just statements. I've got notes here. So there was a discussion about what the mission of that it was established in order to provide services to the community members and help them transition from house, I think there's a typo there, to more permanent housing. Well, there is no evidence in this report that maybe there was testimony, but there is no evidence under neighborhood livability. I don't know what that is other than what I heard tonight. I've looked at the criteria, talked about the characteristics of the site. It does comply with the fact that it is a conditional use in the zone. That is true. The proposed use will not alter the character. There is discussion about discrimination. That's a two-way street. Residents and property owners are people with rights and should have protections as well. You could easily flip that and say they have been discriminated against. They have the inability to use their property, which we've heard testimony. They've been subject to being restricted to being indoors because they don't feel safe going outdoors. Again, that may not be entirely all the people that are going to Father's Heart, but I doubt that some of the people would not be there for Father's Heart, because as it was testified, even after hours being closed, they're still there. They're coming there again. I don't think that was adequately addressed in the staff report. They were just, again, blanket statements, but nothing to back it up. When you get to neighborhood and dealing with the comprehensive plan, there's an assumption about maximizing efficiency. I don't know. I didn't see any evidence in the staff report that said how this was being operated. That a shelter will not likely have additional impacts to neighborhood livability beyond the existing impacts associated with a day shelter. So there's the staff linking the two things again when we've told we can't link them. And I wrote in my notes, I think that's substantially different. What's being proposed is substantially different from the day use. And staff says, well, it's not. So I don't know, is it or isn't it? The proposal would increase neighborhood livability by providing community members with a warm and safe place to sleep on freezing nights while ensuring that neighborhood livability for existing residents is maintained through a community engagement program. Well, we've already heard testimony that a community engagement program is only one-sided. You can't have a community engagement program when the community isn't engaged. It's not going to be resolved, as Commissioner Lyle Smith said, with a meeting. It's going to be resolved with mediation and lots of meetings. And I think that needs to happen before that happens, before anything else happens. Lots of findings complies as proposed without, again, any substantive evidence as to how it complies. And I wrote that all over this report. It says a shelter location that is integrated in an existing neighborhood near essential services. I'm not sure what other essential services are nearby other than the transit center. And I guess that was, there was said it met the transportation goal. We didn't have any information about how many people come there via transit. So I can't say that that finding is met. That's what I wrote here. Do we know how many visitors come by transit? I don't know. It's not supported by facts. The suitable, permits for conditional use, should have, we could make additional standards on suitable landscaping, off-street parking, other reasonable restrictions, conditions that would safeguard and uphold the spirit and the intent of the zoning ordinance and mitigate adverse effects upon the neighboring properties by reason of use, extension, construction, and alteration as set forth in the findings by the Planning Commission. They were pretty minimal. I don't think that those conditions really meet the letter of the law to minimize impacts. There's other places I wrote, how has the applicant demonstrated compliance? Again, no evidence on or standards or facts in here. So I just had a hard time with this. And as I stated at the beginning, that if we were reviewing this based on good deeds and intent to do good, there wouldn't be a question in my mind, but that's not the criteria. Not enough to rely on good deeds for a land use application. And I understand we've got this other state law hanging out there, but I think that they're, like you, Mayor Lyle Smith, I think we can do more. I would not be opposed to recommending denial and then turning around and waiting for the appeal period, but also granting them emergency shelter use. And I know that that's not what Commissioner O'Donnell wanted when we supported the addition of this in the comp plan, in the zoning code. But I can't in good conscience look out at the people in this audience on both sides of this issue and say that this application complies with the standards and criteria as outlined in Title 1756. I can't do that. And that's where my dilemma lies.
Commissioner Morrow?
Thank you, Mayor. I too had some issues with the staff report, and I'm going to keep this short because you two have both already alluded to some of my concerns. And so the big one for me that I'm going to address is the issue of community engagement. And I'm just wondering why, after all of these complaints, they've been saying, the applicants have been saying, our phone line is always open. And after all of these complaints, why, when we're at this point where we're stipulating that you must have these conversations with the community, are they now saying, okay, we will do that? Because it seems to me if they want to garner favor with the community in which they are residing, they would have done that beforehand. I heard the applicant say that he was uncomfortable canvassing the neighborhood to talk to residents. And well, I'm hearing these people out here saying that they're uncomfortable behind their own doors. And so, again, it goes both ways. On the other side of things is the comp plan, and like you were saying, Mayor, the neighborhood livability. That one was also hard for me. So I'm reading through what the staff put in the report for the current comp plan, and it says, Goal 2.4, neighborhood livability. Provide a sense of place and identity for residents and visitors by protecting and maintaining neighborhoods as the basic unit of community life in Oregon City. And then it goes on, this one stood out to me. It says, let me see. Policy 2.4.2. Strive to establish facilities and land uses in every neighborhood that help give vibrancy, a sense of place, and a feeling of uniqueness, such as activity centers and points of interest. Well, we have the uniqueness part locked down with all the stories that we've been hearing about. What we've heard these last few hours, that is pretty unique. But I don't think that's what the aim was when they were writing this comprehensive plan. And so I think that, yes, I guess you could say that there is a sense of uniqueness, but where's the vibrancy? And so, having been on the OC 2040 committee and looking into a lot of the comprehensive plan stuff, I found this interesting, and I agree with you, Mayor, that I don't think that this fits into the criterion of neighborhood livability.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Well, I have an abundance of notes also, but I think the first things I'd like to say is my thanks to all those who came forward and rendered testimony. I know how difficult it is from the times before I was a commissioner. And I want to compliment those commissioners who have already spoken because they have specifically addressed the criteria and recognized those things put forward by the speakers. So as I said before, today's decision is very narrow, and it's not dealing with if the facility should be there. And there is no question that the Father's Heart mission is commendable, and it's a worthy mission. The question is, the things we're balancing tonight, trying to strike a balance between the impact on a homeless population and the impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And, for those of us that watched the previous meetings, Planning Commission, we heard the expressions of the clients and we heard the expressions of the neighborhood, many of which were repeated tonight and duplicated that which they presented before. I do want to compliment those who presented tonight. They specifically addressed their concerns to the very criteria that we're supposed to consider. Characteristics of the neighborhood, negative impacts of the neighborhood, livability. Specifically, they were very good on addressing the question and putting to the forefront the question, does the proposed use does not alter the character of the surrounding area or substantially limits, impairs, precludes the use of the surrounding properties for their primary use. That is the key criteria to me. It's an objective one. In my view, the original findings, and I reference this because it was included in the reading material, the 2016 similar use decision was faulty on its face because comparing the present use as it is to that of the previous use of a satellite sheriff's office and a community corrections office with trained staff personnel and not part-time, that comparison is not valid. And I question I heard Mr. Gant talk about improving the staff, but the previous use of staffing by the county, they had professionally trained personnel and professionally trained staff, and that's lacking, and maybe that'll improve in the future. So again, I'm back to balancing the impact of the neighborhood versus the alternative offerings of service, serving the same purpose. And Mr. Gant said something that struck a chord with me. Rather than house people, could he not act as a referral service? If people come to him on those cold evenings, could he not arrange for them to be transported to other areas? And so rather than house those people, act as a referral service. The other question that's in my mind, and fellow commissioners have touched on it, you know, the history begs the question is, has the Father's Heart historically been a good neighbor? And unfortunately, in my mind, that answer is no. I've heard about things about, I don't know if it was called community engagement or good neighbor plans or whatever, but they're almost non-existent and certainly weren't pursued to the advantage of the neighborhood. So when I look at expanding the hours, I think about it in terms of the impact on not only the facility itself, but the homeowners. And when I look at a home, you know, a home is the single largest investment you'll ever make. And it is where you raise your children, and it is where you seek refuge from the slings and arrows of life. This use has taken that away from these people. So I think the proposed use has significantly altered the character of the neighborhood. And in the end, I see no way to mitigate that adverse effect. And yes, what's my answer? I will vote to deny because I don't see where expanding these hours, expanding this use does not compound and expand upon the original error. I hope that we seek a regional solution. I compliment the mission. The question is, where is it best provided so as not to violate these other conditions that are the subject of our decision tonight. And I'll leave my discussion at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. So before we move on, it is 10 p.m. and I need general consensus by the commission to continue this meeting past 10 p.m. So I'm going to assume we have general consensus unless I see thumbs up. Okay, we have general consensus, so thank you very much. Got to follow our rules and procedures as much as possible. Commissioner Smith.
I won't add a lot more. I appreciate the commissioners answering my question early on. I think that conversation actually helped a lot in my mind trying to separate what the difference is between issuing the emergency once a year versus this new process. So I appreciate everyone's explanation for that and background, because I do believe that this use has altered the neighborhood. And I appreciate hearing from everyone on that topic. I do hope we can work together as a city with the neighborhood and Father's Heart to try to create a solution moving forward, but that's a topic for another night. I appreciate the dialogue with the commission. I think this commission has looked through this extensively, and I appreciate the dialogue. I can't hear you.
So he's going, ready?
Yes.
I know that in the process of land use planning that conditional uses can be limited. They are conditional upon their face. If we were to, let me just hypothetically throw this out, we were to ask for revised findings based on what we've heard tonight, but also granted, there's a way to do it. I'm just, again, thinking off the top of my head, way to grant it, but only for the period of 1 year for the winter season, subject to coming back and making sure the substantive list of conditions that I would want to add to this would be followed and implemented. I know that I have worked on conditional use permits that got reviewed. Well, matter of fact, the one that get reviewed every year was Metro. And we had the possibility of revoking that permit, although it's highly unlikely, but they had a set of conditions they had to meet every year. We had to adjust findings to make that happen. I recall there may have been another one as well. And after a couple of years, the conditional use permit went away, so to speak, and then we did, it was done. The other option is what Commissioner Smith was suggesting, is how to reinstate an emergency declaration with conditions.
So I was looking at this earlier tonight and haven't discussed with staff, but I would note that 1756010B says permits for conditional use shall stipulate restrictions or conditions which may include but are not limited to a definite time limit to meet such conditions. So if the commission were able to craft a set of conditions saying, we're going to come back here next year and the year after, and in those terms, those times, we want to see these things addressed and taken care of. Obviously the devil's in the details in terms of, putting those conditions in a way that, is achievable and can be known in advance whether, that they can be met. And so, there is an option to do that.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I watched the planning commission at the end of their decision-making process almost go down the same route that Commissioner McGriff suggested, which essentially undoes what we're accomplishing here tonight, which is to render a decision. And that should be pursued independently of this. I think we should make a decision based on the facts presented to us tonight and leave anything else for separate discussions.
I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but, as a planner, we always have these ideas, and that's what was coming out of my brain. Do we have an option of, outside of this permit, to have another emergency declaration? As a commission, do we have the authority to do that?
Certainly, the commission has the authority to declare an emergency. If I am recalling correctly, and I don't have
No, I know what we said.
From the last meeting, when the last emergency was declared, this was the last emergency.
Right. We weren't going to do it again.
Well, but we are entitled to change our minds.
Certainly.
So, I said a bunch of comments earlier about my reasoning of where I was headed with the permit decision. However, I do want to take the time to say how much I value the work of Father's Heart. And it pains me right now to think about the fact that they paid $5,000 for a conditional use permit that we may deny, and that they are absolutely correct in them saying that they did it because we essentially told them they had to do it because we didn't want to do another emergency resolution. So I am having, that is probably where my struggle is the most right now. I feel like we've been, in that case, probably unfair to Father's Heart. And I'm sure they feel like they have been jumping through hoops to try to get to a positive resolution, only to feel probably very defeated at this moment, even though we haven't had a vote, but I can read the tea leaves of whatever I just said. I do believe that Mr. Gant made a bunch of great comments. The one that struck me, and I believe it was his comment, though, it was about the heat and the fact that we opened cooling shelters. And it makes me consider where's the city in this conversation? And if we're gonna make Father's Heart jump through all these hoops, I would much rather partner with Father's Heart and try to come up with a solution where there is sheltering in a location that we feel is appropriate within the correct zone, and that perhaps there could be some happy solution. You know, maybe after this winter season. I don't think it's going to be something that happens overnight, but I think someone else in the public comment mentioned us having a homeless plan, a plan to address homelessness, and that we needed that. So maybe you don't know, that's one of our new commission goals for this biennium. It is a project for us to work. I got criticized for using the word holistic, so maybe I should use comprehensive. A comprehensive plan on addressing homelessness, and I think this conversation needs to be there. Like, what are action items that the city can take, partnering with Father's Heart, partnering with others to help work on this issue. It's not going to solve this tonight, but I wanted the folks with Father's Heart to know that how much I do support them and what they're doing, and I think the community recognizes it. And I think that it's hard to speak out as a neighbor because you're probably quickly going to be labeled as you're heartless. We're probably going to be labeled that as well for the decision that we're making, that we don't care about these people, or that, you know, and it's just not true. It's just, this is a very difficult decision that we wouldn't be here at 10:30 at night laboring over this decision, because this does weigh heavy, I think, for all of us. And I think I feel safe in speaking that all of us feel that way. So I'm still grieving over the fee. If there's, I don't know if there's any options there. So I'll be toiling with that one. Maybe there's a GoFundMe or something that the neighborhood could do to support them. But anyway.
No, I understand your concern, and, you know, we would tell any other applicant that there's no guarantees. I mean, we know that going in. However, I understand what you're saying. I totally understand what you're saying. I want a place like Father's Heart to be successful. And maybe their measure of success is different than my measure of success, but I don't see that it has been successful. And I think what troubled me the most is, you know, when I find out that our partner jurisdictions are dropping people off at their doorstep that they didn't ask for. They're not going to turn anybody away. But yet, you know, here we are. How do we, it's not our problem to solve as only Oregon City. That's, you know, we've been talking about this since I lived here. How do we get other people to the table? And, you know, the Homeless Coalition group that's been meeting, I don't see any solution that's come out of 5 years. Do we have a facility that's a full service facility, which is what they told us they were going to do? I know this is another topic, but we don't have it. Where is it? What is going on is, I feel, beyond the capability of what Father's Heart has the ability to do. It's bigger than them, and they're one little piece, and we've got one little piece over here and one little piece over there. The question is, how do we bring all those pieces together so that it is, you know, like the facility that Homer Williams has that he's created in Portland. That is a one-stop shop. People are not all over the place and having to be here or there or whatever. I don't think we have the Homer Williams deep pockets to do that in Oregon City, but we can begin the dialogue. So I think I also want to say that I agree with what you said about all of us feeling this way. I have not had, for what it's worth, a good night's sleep since this application came in, because I have been stressing out about it. And I have been reading and reading and reading and reading and listening to both sides of the equation of people approaching me or talking to me or telling me things. And I don't have any place to go with that. Can't tell them that this is the solution.
Okay. So I think we've all done the rounds. We've kind of said our piece. I think we need a motion. We need a decision to move this, either that or a motion to continue this to another date, I would recommend we not do that. I would like to have a decision tonight.
Well, we're going to need to have revised findings if we recommend denial. So that's just the way that is going to have to come back.
I'm sorry, I
Mr.
couldn't
Kaiser.
quite hear what Commissioner McGriff was saying, but I think it was along the same line that, what we'd suggest is a tentative motion to deny. We've taken hopefully some pretty good notes of what you said, and what we do is try to put that in a comprehensive format and bring it back to you on September 15th, was it? For you to review and hopefully reach a final decision. 120-day period for this lasts until October 21st, so September 15th should give us more than enough time to get something back to you.
Okay. And then at that second hearing, there would be no opportunity for testimony at all. You would just be voting on the decision.
So I think before I make a motion that we have, I say we, but we have a lot of work to do to try to help Father's Heart with an alternative. And I don't know if that's going to be through staff or we meet a couple of commissioners and staff. I don't know what that means. I don't know how that would work, but I am willing to participate in that because I think there is another option.
Donald?
Well, when we say we have always known that homelessness is a regional problem. We have other layers of government, we have metro and county. We have money flowing at different levels. Engaging those people and seeing what funding could be procured at Father's Heart, even to the point of possibly relocating to a superior facility. Tackling this alone is not a solution. Regional is a solution. So the question is, how do we engage those people, get them to contribute and make something meaningful and substantive that will accomplish the very goals that Father's Heart is putting forward? Thanks.
There a motion?
Everybody's waiting on everybody else.
Can we put forth a motion to deny pending receipt of the revised findings from staff? Is that a proper motion, or how should the motion read?
I think that's appropriate to what I heard was fine.
The only problem is I didn't quite hear it. I was trying to read his lips.
The motion was motion to deny pending receipt of revised findings from staff.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl?
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. As you can see, this was not an easy decision for any of us, and I don't think it's easy for the community either, or for Father's Heart, so I hope we can move this forward in a positive way. Ms. Turway, you look like you have something to say. Follow up? No? Okay. All right, so that concludes the public hearings of this agenda.
Commissioner Lyle Smith, I am sincere in what I said, that sitting down, trying to find an option. So I will meet with staff.
I was very sincere in what I said too. I would love to see what the city, I think there's some opportunities here. If we can open a cooling shelter, I think we should be considering a warming shelter. So I know I probably just made staff panic, but anyway.
I'll call you.
All right, so we don't have any general business. Communications is item number 10. Mr. City Manager.
No, I have no updates tonight, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have anything of note to mention for this evening? I see silence. I don't have anything. I've been so focused on this, I have not gathered notes for any communications. So with that, we're adjourned.